Looking at our list, it's pretty close to what we expect from our design. There's just a couple of minor tweaks that we need to make. So if we go to the LI as an example, we just want to give it a bit of a border. So we can say border dash bottom is, and let's reuse that border variable that we're using. So we'll just add that there, and we can see, okay, that's good. That's working for us. The only thing that's still kind of missing for us is we need a bit of a margin just between the items. So we can say that the margin dash bottom is 0.5 rem. And so if we repeat that for all of the items, this pretty much would be it for us with regards to the list. We can actually make this the default way that lists render, and then we'll just override it when we go and make changes to the grid layout. Going to our code, we can just add a piece of code here for our list styling. We'll just say make all of our list items look like that, please. And when refreshing our browser, we can see there we are. So the list is done. The next thing we need to do is to get this grid display to work. But the first step around that would be just to go and do the styling. Let's just get that out of the way first, and then we'll worry about hooking this up on the binding engine. So the first thing that we're going to need is we need to set up that style. So let's say my collection UL that has a class of grid on it. I want us to go and do a bit of styling, so we'll say that the display is grid. And then just for testing purposes, let's go here and say class equals grid. So we're doing that so we can get this to work first, go play with our styling, make sure that we get our layout correct, and then we can worry about the binding. The other thing that's missing here though is just to say my list items, I need to make them a little bit more boxy and give them a bit more dimensions to it when I am working with a grid. So let's just quickly copy that, and then we'll put the LI in here, and then we'll just for now give it sort of basic styling as we can see here. So we'll say that the width is 3 rem, height is 3 rem, the border we're just going to reuse the variable, okay, and the border dash radius, we're just going to use our radius variable as well. There we go. So now we've got some reuse on that. Let's go and see how that looks along, and then we'll tweak it accordingly. So here is our UL. If we look at the grid, we can see how this has now been divided up. We haven't defined any columns or rows for it, and I think that would probably be the next step now. Our list items are maybe a little bit on the small side, so let's just go and have a look. Probably make them a little bit bigger, say 5 rem by 5 rem. Yeah, that looks a little bit closer to what we're looking for. So let's go and change the size of these items, and let's go and make this grid display actually use the column space available and then wrap to the rows. Alright, so here's our styling for the CSS grid, and here's the styling for the LI that is inside our grid. Now remember, we added this margining here by default, and we don't want that on our grid items. So the first thing we need to do is go and take that out and say, okay, forget about that, the grid is going to deal with all of my layout for me. The next thing that we want to do is, in the design we have 3 columns and a bunch of rows, but realistically we want to be able to expand this thing, and as I expand it, we need to either fit more or less columns in there, and the same goes for the rows. So the way that we're going to do that is to autofill the grid. So we'll say that the grid has template columns, and we want to repeat this for autofill. And we know from our experiment that the size that we want the items to be is 5 rem. And we'll just copy and paste that and do exactly the same thing for our rows. Okay, so now I'll have that automatic column expanding and the automatic row layout as well. And then what I want to determine is just give this stuff a bit of a gap in between. So we'll say give us a gap of 0.5 rem. Now all that remains is to go and test. So on refreshing this, I saw that my gap is not working. Let's go find out why. So we select our grid and we can see in the browser, yes, grep is not correct. Let's use gap. Okay, yes, this looks exactly like we wanted. So let's go and fix that spelling mistake, and then let's go and tie the styling up with the binding engine. So currently we have the class hard-coded to grid, but we can change that to say class list.if. If my display status is equal to list, actually we can just say if it equals to grid, then I want this class to be grid. I don't need to put an else in there because we already have a default. So what this will do is it'll add the class grid if the display status is grid, and if it is not grid, in other words list, it will just remove the grid display status for us. Let's go and have a look in the browser. So we refresh our application, we can see that it has now defaulted to list again as we expect it to be. We click on grid and we see the grid changing. Let's just go and have a look at this guy here so we can see the class grid is there. Then we click on the list and grid and list and grid and list. So that was quite painless and easy. The next part we want to do is we actually want to populate this content dynamically based upon repositories that we want to use. So the whole point of the component is to make it extendable, and that will be the next section that we'll be looking at.